From the Skyterra Wellness Retreat, this is the Inspired Intentions Podcast, where we help people build the skills and mindset to live a healthy life. Hey everyone, before we dive into today's episode, if you've been enjoying our podcast, take a moment to rate and review. It may seem like a small thing, but our ratings and reviews make a huge difference in the quality of our show. They help us reach more listeners like you so we can continue bringing you more amazing content. So, if you've found inspiration, learned something new, or just love tuning in every week, please rate the Inspired Intentions Podcast 5 stars and leave us a review and even share with a friend. We truly appreciate each and every one of you. Now let's get into the show. Inspired Intentions listeners, we are back for our part 2. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you should go back and listen to part 1. This is part 2 of a 101 weight loss series with our fitness director, Ryan Lee. We released our first episode last week with Ryan. And for those of you that did listen, or if you haven't heard yet, it's just a reminder that the first one was all about Ryan's perspective on deficit as what we use to work with weight loss, losing body fat. Part 2 today, we alluded to at the end of part 1, and it was we're going to talk a little bit about movement.
That's right.
And how we train. Ryan, thanks for coming back.
Yeah, appreciate you having me back.
Yeah, we are happy to be kind of picking through this 3-part series with you, going into some detail for folks. I know that possibly weight loss is a big topic. Usually as we get closer and closer to the new year, people start talking more and more about that. You see more gym memberships popping up now than any other time of year.
That's right. Yeah, we were talking about that in a lecture this week, actually. Just making mention of the fact that sometimes we set these big outcome goals for ourselves at the beginning of a new year. It just kind of creates a divide between where you're at currently and where you're trying to go. It can create such a divide that it can feel almost off-putting. So maybe before we even dive in here, if you're setting New Year's goals coming up soon, you just want to make sure that those goals are action-based, things that can be measured in a shorter period of time. You know, what is it that I can accomplish this week as opposed to who might I be down the road 2 years from now? This is going to take forever. This is going to be really hard.
Yeah, we break it down in intentions to like a 60 to 90 day period. Mm-hmm. And if you have a goal that seems really, really far away, I say it's like reaching for the moon. Mm-hmm. It can seem like forever away. How do we make it smaller? Yeah. How do we make it a much smaller piece? Like, what's the first step in getting to the moon, and make that the achievement? Yeah. Right. Not necessarily the big picture down the road. And so keep that in mind. And I think when we start talking about movement, that's where it can kind of become daunting. So I want to hear your perspective on how we should train if we're trying to lose some body fat.
Yeah, 100%. Remember from episode 1, we talked about the idea of not being able to out-train your fork. All right. It's super important to remember. However, the way in which we move our body does become really important for an assortment of reasons. So when we're thinking about weight loss and training, we do want a nice holistic approach to fitness, meaning that we want to find a combination of the right things, not just putting all of our eggs in one basket, if you will. So to start off, we need to make sure, this is basically a non-negotiable at this point, is we need strength training as a part of our weekly protocol. We know that strength training is essential when it comes to building the metabolic foundation for who we are. We had talked a little bit about muscle being much more metabolically active than body fat mass, and that's a really critical factor. We want to make sure that our body is working at its most optimal level, and it's going to do that only when we have adequate muscle on the body. So strength training is really, that's what sits at the core of what we do when it comes to weight loss. When you have more muscle, we have a higher basal metabolic rate. We also are going to prevent us becoming more frail as we age. I know I mentioned that previously. That's the biggest thing. We strength train for muscular integrity, right? We strength train so that our bodies can be strong and capable to do everything we want to do as we age. But then we also strength train because we want to have an efficient metabolism.
Yeah. It's our protection.
Yeah. It's a good way to think about it.
I do think about it that way. I've had a lot of family members that could use some more muscle mass in their older years.
Yeah.
And you see that in injuries and falls,
100%.
fall rate. There's this statistic out there about, after a certain age, if you fall, you're this less likely to regain X amount of muscle mass. It's pretty astounding when you look into that research.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. I just, when I think about how strength training relates to, fat loss, we realize also that when we strength train, we also get the added benefit of post-workout calorie consumption, right? So we call this EPOC, which is excess post-oxygen consumption. That's just going to be our body continuing to burn calories after we have exercised up to maybe 2 hours post-exercise. Through the repair process, the body's continuing to stay in that high metabolic state. So that's the reason why this is an added leveraging tool when it comes to weight loss.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Is that why I've always been told that like the first 2 hours after a workout are critical for getting your proteins in?
Yeah, we've seen a little bit of the research swing on this. For a long time, I know when I was first, getting into weightlifting, and it always became like you got to get a protein shake or you have to eat something high protein within 20 to 30 minutes post workout. I think some of the most recent research is actually indicating that window, that anabolic window, if you will, can actually extend 4 to 6 hours post working out. But we do want to make sure that the next meal that we consume is protein concentrated, because that's going to help along the repair process. One of the effects that you might feel from this excess post-oxygen consumption standpoint is you'll feel that your body is just hot. So after your strength training, it might be an hour afterwards and you still feel worked up. Mm-hmm. You still feel like that internal, core body temperature is high. And that's just because you're still firing on all cylinders. The body's trying to repair from the stressors that you've imposed upon it.
Most noticeable in the winter.
Yeah.
You step outside, you feel it.
Yeah. So I just wanted to go back to that idea of EPOC.
Yeah.
Because there was a little word that was left out in there. So this is excess post-exercise oxygen consumption.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, there's a lot of words happening there. And when I said it the first couple of times, I was like, wait a minute, exercise was left out there, right? This is the extra oxygen that the body is consuming and utilizing as a result of, exercise.
You said it so confidently.
Man, glad we rectified that.
We had been getting some emails.
Yeah,
for sure. So dive into this just a little bit deeper. How should we be training?
Yep. So when it comes to strength training, we're trying to build the habit of, 2 to 3 days of, targeted strength training each week. Mm-hmm. Lots of different ways that we can set up training splits. And, that's probably a topic for another day. But at the end of the day, we need to put our body under some solid resistance at least 2 to 3 times per week. From there, we think about what are some of the other leveraging tools for weight loss. We can think about, cardiovascular training, cardiorespiratory training. Brings up the idea of, high intensity interval training. HIIT training. We've heard about it for the past decade, I'm sure, at least. Yeah. And HIIT training absolutely has its time and place. Because very similar to strength training is the higher intensity stress that we're placing on the body can assist us when it comes to that EPOC concept, right? So we're going to be burning even after the exercise has ceased. The other thing that it does is it helps us to optimize calories out in a shorter time frame, right? So when it comes to high intensity interval training, for those of us who are not too familiar with this, this is an interval-based protocol. It can take different forms, but essentially we're trying to elevate our heart rate, trying to get our heart rate up as high as we can safely, then following that up with a recovery period and undulating between those two experiences.
So like hitting in like zone 3 and then trying to bring it as close to zone 1 as you can.
Yeah, all the way up. You could take it zone 3, 4, 5, trying to get to between 80 to 95% of your maximum heart rate. Then on your recovery phases, hopefully returning into zone 2. But if your intervals are really short, you potentially won't. So again, lots of different protocols for like how you can structure those workouts. But the beauty with, high intensity interval training is, especially for people who are a little restricted on time, you can get a real solid cardio calorie burn in a shorter window.
Call it smart cardio.
Smart cardio.
A reference, yeah, because you're just being smart with your time.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yep. And for some people, they love it. They get addicted to it. That's all they want to do. For others, it can be a bit unpleasant in the beginning because, your heart is pounding in a way that it probably hasn't in a while. But you'll be fascinated to find how quickly you can build endurance through this type of interval training.
And this type of interval training can be used with any type of cardio equipment, any type of swimming, treadmill.
Yeah.
Am I going to put a wrong answer out there? Pretty much anything as long as your heart rate's up?
That's it. Yeah. Even some basic forms of like fitness equipment. I've seen people do, interval-based workouts on a stepper, or using a slam ball. It's really just about trying to elevate your exertion and then giving yourself recovery time in between.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's probably number 2, is building in some, higher intensity interval based trainings. Doesn't need to be every day by any means, once or twice a week can really help to assist us along our weight loss goals. And I think the third one, which I've been a pretty big proponent of here at Skyterra, is just the use of our zone 2 cardiovascular training. A lot of us have looked into the research related to zone 2 because I've heard guests, tell me that they've been listening to, Peter Attia or, Dr. Rhonda Patrick, Andrew Huberman, right? These are some of the bigger voices that we've heard of recently when it comes to zone 2 training and what it can do for longevity benefits. Zone 2 training is going to be us operating at a much lower heart rate zone, so about 60 to 70% of our maximum heart rate. And this is a more sustained effort. So instead of us only working out for, 10 to 15 minutes in a high intensity environment, we're looking at anywhere between 20, 30, 40 minutes, right, of a sustained effort, lower heart rate zone. The reason why this is important is not only can it have benefits at a cellular level, right? The mitochondria of the cells become adaptive to this specific type of stressor. You become a better energy producer when you do more zone 2 work. The other thing that's pretty neat about this is that in those lower heart rate zones, your body more naturally will rely on what's called oxidative phosphorylation. Right? This is going to be us mobilizing body fat, oxidizing it as an energy substrate.
Right.
Whereas higher heart rate zones are going to be primarily you're fueling your body with glucose. When you're strength training, you're entering zones 3, 4, 5. High intensity interval training, you're certainly exceeding zone 2. And that's where our body relies a lot on glucose in order to just give us the energy to get through. And that's not a bad thing. Just wanted to call out the distinction, though, between those two things. So
that's helpful.
Yeah. So when you're in zone 2, again, lower heart rate zone, hopefully mobilizing, oxidizing fat, and getting those cellular benefits as well. Yeah. So I think that's kind of the 3 main pillars when it comes to, what we do for ourselves. We've excluded a talk on mobility right now.
Right.
I don't want to, turn a complete blind eye to the fact that mobility is important, but I think our conversation has been a bit more targeted to weight loss and, what we can do with our body to get to our weight loss goals.
And we can talk a little bit about that in the next segment, part 3. Because
Sure.
I think that, and that's alluding for you listeners a little bit. That's alluding to kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
I think it'd be a disservice not to talk a little bit more specifically about like time, because I feel like this is a place where people can go a bit overboard with their time and do too much.
Yep.
Which then plays almost into that deficit conversation that we had last week. So as far as like how much strength training should we do, but then how much time should we spend on that? How long should we spend on interval training in a week?
Yeah.
Like what's realistic for somebody, and how much zone 2 could we use in a week, like timing wise?
Great question. I would say if you have not done much fitness, you want to try to pull this back.
Right.
You want to make sure, similar to when we talked about calorie deficits, we also don't want to go too far too fast with our body and how we're moving it. So I know I gave the recommendation of, 2 to 3 strength days per week, but if you're just getting started and you're trying to establish a new habit, if you're able to train 1 day of strength each week just to get the ball rolling, fantastic. What does that need to look like? It can look different for everyone. Again, if you're just starting, maybe it's just combining a few exercises together to create your first workout. We kind of use the 6 functional movement patterns to inform our programming here. So I'm thinking about movements like hinging my hips, squatting, pushing, pulling, core-based movements, carrying. I kind of use those to help me structure full body routines. But when you're thinking about time frames, you can think, 30 minutes to 40 minutes, I think is adequate if you're properly adding a little warm up onto that, maybe a little cool down afterwards, but anytime you're strength training more than an hour, you're probably going to have some very nuanced goals. Maybe you're seeking athletic performance, right? There's certainly times when we could take those durations longer. 30 to 40 minutes is going to be adequate for a strength training workout.
For the average person who's trying to get it in amongst the rest of their life.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And then your question about the cardio training is simply, from what I've read and researched, is you want your zone 2 training to create the foundation for your cardiorespiratory efficiency, meaning your zone 2 time should be much greater than the amount of interval-based work that you do each week. I've heard an 80 to 20 distribution, even, advanced elite performing athletes, 85% of their time they're training in zone 2, 15 to 20% of their time they're working in higher intensity interval training.
Okay.
So I think that's kind of like a nice way to think about this is, splashing in an interval training each week, 1 or 2, but really letting your zone 2 lead the way when it comes to, your cardio approach.
Gotcha. And that might look like another couple days per week. And
Exactly. Another couple days per week. One of the recommendations, currently is trying to acquire 150 to 200 minutes of zone 2 training per week, which sounds like a lot. And I would, again, recommend that you don't, bite that whole piece off to start.
Yeah.
But you could kind of compartmentalize that in your brain and think, okay, that's a 30-minute, brisk walk 5 days a week. You know what I mean? That could be post meals. That could be at the end of your day.
Yep.
Again, if that's too much, it's too much. That's fine. But that could be a long-term goal that you could aim toward.
Should be something you should be able to trickle in amongst other habits in your life.
Yeah.
It's kind of the way I like to think about it.
Absolutely.
Like you walk the dog, right? That counts.
Yeah, 100%. Because people will ask me that. What about like daily movement patterns? Does that count toward my zone 2 times? It all counts.
Yeah.
It all counts. You might not be in zone 2 the whole time. At the end of the day, we're trying to get our body moving more often. That's stage 1 always, is daily movement patterns.
Yeah, and we're meant to move slowly for a really long time. And we're meant to move quickly for a very short amount of time. That's like what the human body is meant for.
Yep.
Keep that in mind when you're training.
Yeah, it's a good way to think about it.
Yep. So to recap, I think we've got how we should train. We need to think about strength training in our lives. We need to think about more low intensity cardiovascular training. And then we're calling it smart cardio, HIIT interval training, but just how to get your heart rate up in some way that's enjoyable for you, hopefully.
That's right.
And then you went over kind of some specifics on time, and this will aid in someone's weight loss journey.
That's right. It's going to aid in weight loss because it's helping us not only to create calorie deficits, but it's helping to keep our body strong, keeping our metabolism high as a result of having muscle mass on the body. So it's all really important stuff, helping to keep our heart strong, building our VO2 max. That's why these are the 3 big pieces to the puzzle.
Yeah, I was going to say longevity.
Longevity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
I think that's great. And the way you describe it and the amount of time, it's doable. It's not, you need to be in the gym 5 days a week. You need to spend every waking moment that you have free moving your body, doing high intensity stuff.
100%.
Like you make it very obtainable.
Yep. Slow and steady is always the way to win the race. A lot of people will say to me, like, it just feels hard. And I just always try to remind everyone, it will be hard until it isn't.
Sure.
And that's the key, right? So it's like through your consistency, it just becomes a part of your lifestyle. I give this last analogy maybe before we sign off here. It's like when you think about a plane taking off, right? The majority of the fuel that is used is during takeoff, right? And then once you hit a cruising altitude, you use a whole lot less fuel as you're getting to your destination, right? And the same is true, I think, for general fitness, but absolutely for weight loss is like, let's expect the fact that this might be a little bit difficult in the beginning, right? We're going to have to be motivated. We're going to have to be disciplined. Then all of a sudden it becomes a part of who you are, right? All of a sudden you're cruising. You didn't even realize how quickly it happened, but
that's a great analogy. I haven't ever heard you say that one. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
It's good stuff. Well, listeners, if you guys have questions for Ryan about episode 1, if you go back and listen to that, or episode 2, shoot us an email at inspiredintentions@skyterrawellness.com. We have part 3 coming at you next week of this 101 weight loss series, and we look forward to talking to you then.
All right.
Looking forward to that conversation, Ryan.
All right. Talk soon.
Later, man.
The Inspired Intentions podcast is a production of Skyterra Wellness Retreat. Special thanks to our executive producer, Alan Broyhill. Send us your questions and comments to inspiredintentions@skyterrawellness.com. Subscribe on iTunes and everywhere podcasts can be found. If someone you know might benefit from this podcast, share Inspired Intentions with them and give us a 5-star rating. Join us next week as we cut through the unrealistic noise on diets and fitness and show you how healthy living fits seamlessly into your already busy life. Thanks for listening.